So today is a very special day. I'm really excited to be here with Lisa Coulson, who is the Chief Human Resource Officer at Principal Financial Group. Lisa, thank you so much for taking the time. This has been a long time in coming.
Yes, Sheryl, thank you. I'm so excited. I was really happy that we were able to meet each other, and we've had some conversations, and I've had a chance to think about our conversation today, and I'm really looking forward to it.
Yeah, so I can't wait for you to share your wisdom on this very important topic of evolving HR with purpose and talking about policy, but how does policy translate into people-centered progress? But before we jump into that important topic, I thought I would ask a little bit about you. Was there a person or a situation that really inspired you to care so deeply about your people and also to ascend to a chief human resource officer?
Yeah, so it always, yes, and so it always starts for me back when I think about my parents. So my dad was an insurance executive and was a huge sports fan. And that's important because I think it drew me to teams. And so there was a certain confidence and a certain way that he interacted with my brothers and I, especially as we were getting involved in things that we all loved together, that showed me the value in belonging in teams. And then my mom, she was a stay-at-home mom, was an amazing cook. And what she ended up doing is bringing us together through tradition, creating a certain amount of stability. But it was not only the family, it was friends, it was the community. And so to me, just from those experiences, I loved collaborating, and now in the nomenclature of HR today, I loved interacting with teams that had a common purpose. There was something about understanding tradition and how people work together that really got me excited about working with people. And then when you think about professionally, what's interesting as I think about, when you're young in your career and you're thinking about what's next for me and what do I do, I loved math and I loved people. And so in some ways that drew me to HR. And we can probably get into more details, but I'd probably start there.
Wow, it is really amazing to reflect on how important and how prominent our lives as young people really impacted what we want to be, or sometimes, what we don't want to be. I've heard both sides,
Yeah.
of the story. So that's really amazing. And for some people watching that don't know you, they might
Mhm.
think that you were born into the world as a chief human resource officer,
Yeah.
or that it was just more likely an easy transition, that you just decided someday you were in more of an entry level position way back when, and then it was just an easy path from A to B. So I'm just wondering, usually for most people that have ascended to where you are in your career, there's usually a little sick hiccups or, side turns along the way. So do you mind sharing what that trajectory was like? Were there any hiccups along the way? And what's been the mindset that's allowed you to keep going?
Oh, I'd love to. I mean, it's interesting because if you were to ask me to reflect now on what I thought my career would look like when I was 22, compared to the evolution, it's interesting throughout your career to know when you're given opportunities, and sometimes it's times of growth, sometimes it feels a little bit chaotic, and and if you would have talked to me at 22, I would have thought something very, very linear. Over time, it's been through getting to know people, building relationships, understanding the business. So, for the first half of my career, I was in consulting. The second half of my career, I've been with Principal Financial Group, 30 years in some way related to HR. But the evolution, I would say, in some years was more horizontal than vertical. And And what was behind that was understanding what's the problem we're trying to solve? When should I raise my hand? And it really is a mindset of thinking through things as opportunities. And so there were times when I would raise my hand and I would think, gosh, I could do that, and it would turn into something that was completely unexpected. And so I've started as an underwriter. For the first half, I would sometimes, because I have grown children, I talk about pre-kids. So the balance of knowing what it's like to be a new mother and to also have a professional career, um, defining what flexibility looked like. And then I had this, it was not an intended rotation, but it was a rotational opportunity based on raising my hand towards business needs that led me eventually to the principal opportunity. And so now when I talk to people young in their career, I sometimes push them a little bit to ask them to think about what do you really love? What does the business need? And are there possibilities you haven't thought of yet that might give you opportunities where you don't even know where that will land? And so that was probably long-winded, but I get very excited about that because I think sometimes it's right in front of you and you maybe don't know it if you don't take a step back.
Yeah, that's so true. And have you ever said yes to something that you were maybe that someone else nudged you towards, or how did that evolution, or what was the deciding factor that led you to a chief HR role?
So the yes that I said early on, so I had this opportunity to work through what I would call all the talent aspects of HR outside of compensation, but I loved math. And so at the time, I had done some project management and had learned different functional areas of HR, and the compensation department was looking for someone to come in with those skills. So they said, we'll teach you compensation design if you'll help us work through the operationalization of this function as we continue to grow. And I thought, gosh, I've consulted on these other things, but could I learn this? Does it make sense? Will I have enough time, to be able to do both things well? And the answer ended up being that I figured it out. That was pivotal for me because, gosh, if you talk to people now, in the 15 years preceding becoming a CHRO, a lot of what I was doing was related to that compensation design, from broad-based design to executive compensation design. And some of those experiences gave me the opportunity to interact with executives, to meet our board of directors, created circumstances where I could work on different projects, learn new things, but also develop the relationships that CHROs need.
Yeah, that's so interesting. So it seems like the message, or one of the messages in there, is really follow what you like. In other words, like you liked math,
Yes.
and have a little faith when someone else gives you a nudge.
Especially when you think about your mentors agree, it's so important to understand the people that you surround yourself with and different ways that they help you. And every once in a while, I think, Cheryl, you've probably found this as well. And sometimes folks give you advice that you need to hear.
Mhm.
And so it is smart to make sure you know who are your advisors, and when should you pause and listen to what they're saying, and see what possibilities are out there.
Yeah, yeah, that's such valuable information to keep in mind, and I love that. I love that story. And well, getting to the main topic now, that evolving HR with purpose, from policy to people-centered power and growth. Um, it's interesting. So my daughter, I have a grown daughter too. She's 25 and she's in recruiting now. So
Mhm,
very different, but she's having a window into talent management. It's
mhm.
for life sciences. And so she's telling me that it's changing a lot. So when you say evolving, I guess the first question is, how is HR evolving? And with all the technology that's flooding in, how do you advise that HR evolves with purpose?
Oh, it's a great question. It's interesting because even using the example with your daughter, in the talent acquisition space, the technology is evolving, so that's changing the way applicants interact with companies. It's changing the way we can access data in different ways. But gosh, when I think about even interviewing, and I won't go back to how many years ago my first interview was, but everything was in person, and having video interviews and chats that occur sometimes through the onboarding process, that's continuing to evolve. And in addition, the conversations are changing. And so there is a technology component to it, but there's also the people component to it. And so practitioners need to stay up to date on both. And so for your daughter, I'd say this is really, really exciting because it does allow her to continue to learn and grow as the function evolves, but also sometimes, as I talk to folks, it's a little bit stressful because you want to be able to do the best of the best as it comes out, but then also keep up with your day job. And so to me, whether you're talking about new technology or policy, it always has to come back to how is that affecting your people, the employees, the way you're interacting with folks, and how that represents what you're trying to do, either in the company or for your customers.
Yeah, that seems like it is getting like some people are worried too. So when you think about whether it's recruiting, outside recruiting or internal talent acquisition, like what would you say to those who are worried as far as what AI is going to do when it comes in, and everything that I've heard says, well, AI isn't a replacement, it's really a tool. So
Yep.
when we talk to, evolving HR, how do you, approach this kind of, I don't say touchy subject, maybe it's an exciting subject, but it's definitely a subject of concern.
Yeah, it's of course all of the above. And so I'd say a couple of different things, and maybe they're both ends of the spectrum. So on the easiest side of the spectrum, the beauty of the last, I guess, 20 years is that technologies have continued to evolve. And so, whether or not it's chat GPT or chat bots or different efficiency tools that folks are using, I know for sure we've been keeping up and integrating that in our work so that we're able to get the productivity gains. What's been interesting to me, at least personally, over the last 3 years, is the pace. Um, I don't know if the pace seems quicker than it did before, or it's just that we're all aware today and we're learning so much so quickly. So, for example, here's a conversation I never thought I'd have. My dad's moving to independent living. He is thinking about replacing his mattress. Was talking to him over the weekend, and he said, "I used ChatGPT for the first time." And I was like, "Holy
Yeah.
cow!" Right? And so I said, "Tell me more. What does that look like?" And he said, "I heard about this thing. I pulled it up, and then he said I listed my age." Kind of that I'm a side sleeper, that I'm interested in understanding when there's sales. And he said, I put all these things into this thing and it told me go to these stores this time of year. Here's where we'll have the sale and look at this kind of thing. That's the exciting part of it, right? So there are things it would have taken him, or certainly would have taken me a lot more time than to do the research to help him get to that answer. So there are ways that understanding that technology and integrating it does change work. The scary part, I think that you alluded to, is that, with change, there's understanding what are all of the different risk factors that companies think about when any technology evolves. So, is it right for your customers? Are there considerations, legal considerations, concerns, different things that organizations can do to ensure that it's being used in the best possible way. And then to employees, anything that I've read so far isn't suggesting that it will replace jobs. But like with any technological advancement, it's important to help employees figure out what does this mean? How are jobs evolving? And then from an HR perspective, are we providing the learning and development to support that evolution? So for example, in the AI space, we'll be doing learning for the entire organization this year that lays the groundwork. And I would say it's foundational. Um, um, but you've got to have the foundational in order to ask the right questions. And so that's the
Mhm.
part that principal is playing to try to educate our workforce. So as the world evolves, we can evolve with it.
Yeah, that seems really smart. You might have gotten out ahead of me for my next kind of related
Oh, sorry about
question.
that.
Question for evolving HR with purpose, but being more
Yeah.
specific with principal,
Yeah.
so it seems like at least one of the things is, educating everybody on
Mhm.
AI, and just so they don't have to be afraid from it, so they can be more efficient with whatever their roles are. But what is front and center most important that you're focused on as far as, when we talk about evolving HR with purpose? So what's really important, let's say in the second half, specifically to principal?
I'd say, I mean, to me, I always start with purpose is tied to values. Purpose, so when I think about our culture, what's important to our customers. So purpose to me then becomes a North Star. So when you think about the exciting times that folks describe, coincidentally, I was talking to someone who's about to retire and she before this meeting and she was describing all of the things that she loved about her career. When I think about purpose and the moments that matter for employees, it really is the time that you spend either doing meaningful work, the way you interact together. And so to me, purpose drives HR strategy, drives HR policy in a way that allows us to know what we say yes to and what we may say no to relative to what we say is important. And so what we can all agree with, and we have many customers, is that we at Principal focus on the customer. And so when we start there, um, and then we think about the strong culture that's here in I would say the Midwest way that we interact with one another, folks that like teamwork tend to gravitate towards that culture. Those two things tend to then become very important as we're working through designing anything, whether it's business process or HR strategy.
Hmm. Yeah, it seems just so important. And what is like is that similar for employees as well? I've just had a couple
Yeah.
interesting conversations with HR officers, chief HR human resource officers, about the relationship between, customers and employees and how they're each treated. And a lot of times that the same philosophy rolls over into the employees. So what are your thoughts on that?
So I'm going to say a yes and. So I'd say it's interesting, especially since I grew up for 15 years in HR consulting. But so when I think about our customer, I know who we define as a company as our customer. When I think about being an HR head, I also know I have an internal customer, which is
Mhm.
our employees, right? And so, and people can, define, are we talking internal, are we talking external? But at the end of the day, my thoughts are our employees are my internal customers. So when I think about how we engage, communicate, allow opportunities for feedback, the way we design our benefits programs, the flexibility that's available. In some ways, as HR practices evolve these days, I think people will call it moments that matter. So
Mhm.
it really is understanding the voice of the employee, which may be sometimes similar to the voice of the customer, and then designing around what's most important. Not, and so when I think about the processes that one would follow to think through a voice of a customer versus a voice of employee, very, very similar. May even have some overlap, but because they're different audiences, maybe you'd come up with different answers. But as far as the way we approach the process of understanding and designing, it's very similar here, which gives me comfort because then I know my science matches, the science that we're using as we think about our customer.
Mhm. I love that, internal customers. I haven't heard that before, but it really seems important. And also too, many times, maybe some people watching or other executives that are not chief human resource officers might think that, well, that's all nice to have. But the reality is, it seems like there'd be an incredible ROI to
Mm.
this philosophy. So, can you just speak to that for a moment? Just the ROI and profitability that's associated?
I can't. So as a math girl, I will tell you that there have been times where we've tried to calculate, the equation. I think there are even some statistics, maybe from Gartner or otherwise, that suggest, highly engaged employees, will give you a return on your investment by 2x or 3x, something like that. I don't. The interesting thing is I don't have the hard math, but I'll tell you my belief if that helps. So, um, my belief is when you have a common purpose and people work together, their enthusiasm and the way they work together nets a better outcome for the company. If you're to break that down into math, then how could you do the math equation? Well, you could look at turnover statistics, you could look at talent acquisition statistics, you can look at different things that allow you to see the cost associated with churn. Um, Unhealthy churn within an employee population. That's how the math would get there. Sometimes, which people can do. So for executives that don't believe, I guess given my style, I'd ask, tell me why you don't believe it, and then can you give me some examples of where you've seen it work or not work, and what's different. My gut tells me 9 times out of 10, it will be the things you hear from people at the end of their career. It's the people, it's how we work together. It's when we did these things that we didn't think we'd do and we had so much fun doing it. I imagine when you take that team and you look at their HR math relative to teams that have a lot of turnover, you're at least going to be 2 to 5x.
Yeah, I would. That probably even seems conservative, but
Oh, right. Yeah,
I
I don't
would.
want to overmath the math, but yes.
I would agree 100%. And I also too, and there's probably some way to do this, but there's probably, at least as a consumer,
Yeah.
I have felt the energy transfer, being a customer, whether, and also too, seeing the difference between the energy transfer, like just how showing up, and also I would imagine that, the science does show that customers buy from people that they like. And so if people are unhappy, that's
Mhm.
going to be a negative energy transfer. But if people are happy, then they're going to do probably a better job building relationships and having a positive energy transfer.
Oh,
So,
exactly.
yeah.
Being curious, asking more questions. Yes,
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah. So it seems like it's incredibly important. And I would just love to see the numbers. I'm not sure if Gardner's doing that or, but if they're not, they should.
Yeah.
Um, so going in then, I know, well, as of the time of recording, we're about halfway through the year, but looking into, 2026 or looking into next year, what's top of mind when it comes to evolving HR with purpose?
For us, what we continue to do is, so we have an enterprise strategy that has talent implications in that people are having opportunities to work cross-functionally more in a matrixed environment, as we focus on the highest priority initiatives. So we've already talked about AI. So you can't open a newspaper, you can't open an HR periodical without AI and return to office being the top two. Um, the other thing that we've also talked about this year is the importance of inclusion. It's something that's a focus in our culture. And so as we develop any talent practices, the way we drive belonging and work together is very important to us. So that will continue to be top of mind as I think about our evolution. When you talk about AI, when you talk about people's growth and development, companies having a strong workforce plan and understanding how will I grow? How will I evolve? And are we having the right HR conversations and are we putting some operations and tools in place so that we could be more planful around either what training and development looks like, what forecasting looks like. So for the end of 2025 and then going into 2026, I'd say all of those topics are top of mind. But when I think about the intersection points of how our teams are working together, that becomes really important.
Yeah, yeah, it seems like at 100%. And so, for everyone watching, what is a call to action or something that you want them to be sure to remember?
Probably to that. So I've been thinking about this, after our pre-call, and so one of the things sometimes I like to smile and think of funny things. So I'm going to go back to Finding Nemo when Dory, had her moment of just keep swimming. I mean,
Mhm.
there are times where sometimes I need a smile and I think, okay, and especially since your podcast is called Fearless, there are these times when we need to be comfortable with being uncomfortable. So I do remind myself, sometimes just keep swimming. And then in addition, I am a believer that we do things together, that it is better as it's not only one person, learning and growing and evolving, it's the whole team. So the other call to action I'd say to all your listeners is, remember to give back as you're getting opportunities, remember to pay that forward and to help those that are either new to their career or maybe working through different things because it really is together, that we win. So that would be what I would say.
Yeah, so important. So keep going, keep swimming,
Yeah.
and
Yes.
be sure to kind of extend an olive branch backwards as you're climbing. That's so important. And I imagine how much more successful everybody would be if we really all leaned into that. And if we're already doing it, maybe even thinking about, well, what's 10% more? How could I do it even?
Oh, right.
Yes, I
Exactly.
love that so much. Well, Lisa, thank you so much for all of your time and sharing your wisdom and to your continued success. And I look forward to following your journey.
Oh, thank you. Appreciate the time. And yeah, it was fun.